They thought the garage was theirs to rule that night. Loud, jeering voices echoing off the concrete walls, hands grabbing where they had no right, while a circle of stunned customers stood frozen. The clang of dropped tools rang out like gunshots, and in the middle of it all, oil-stained and breathless, she clenched her fists so tight her knuckles burned. Her name was Riley Carter, 29, and she'd been fixing engines since she was 16. The Carter family's garage had been in the neighborhood for 3 generations, and she was proud to be the first woman in the family to run it. But pride didn't keep the vultures away, especially the kind who saw a woman in coveralls as a punchline, a target, or both. That night, the problem wasn't just about harassment. It was about a long line of petty challenges that had been building for months. The ringleader, Troy, had swaggered in weeks earlier with his 2 friends, Mac and Rico, making crude jokes while Riley tried to work. They'd accidentally blocked her truck and criticized her work to customers and hinted she wasn't real mechanic material. She'd ignored it at first. After all, in this business, you learn to shake off the occasional loudmouth. But Troy had a mean streak, the kind that enjoyed an audience. It started with a smirk when he asked if she'd check under his hood, the other 2 snickering behind him. Tonight, it escalated. Riley had been working on a customer's pickup when they came in under the pretense of needing a quick fix. She knew better. While she leaned over the open hood, Rico brushed against her hip, muttering something about tight spaces. She spun glare sharp enough to cut steel, but Mac was already behind her, crowding her back. Troy's hand, greasy from touching someone else's car, landed low on her waist. The sudden shock froze her in place for a heartbeat. Around them, the shop's usual hum of work and chatter went silent, and she stepped away, heart-hammering jaw locked. Back off, she snapped, voice low but steady. Her customers were watching, and she wouldn't give these men the satisfaction of seeing her flustered. Troy laughed, raising his hands in mock surrender. Easy grease, girl. We're just playing. The phrase meant to downplay to make her reaction seem unreasonable, stung more than the grab itself. Her mind raced. This wasn't the first time she'd been cornered in her own shop, but it would damn well be the last. She'd put up with the sly comments, the second guessing, the smirks that told her they didn't think she belonged here. Not anymore. She forced herself to finish the customer's repair as if nothing had happened, though every wrench twist tightened the coil in her chest. The 3 of them stayed leaning against the counter, making a show of watching her work. When they finally left, tossing a sarcastic, "See ya, sweetheart," over their shoulders, Riley's hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the raw, white-hot need to take back control. That night, after closing up, she sat on the shop floor beside her father's old red toolbox, the smell of oil and steel thick in the air. Her reflection stared back at her from a chrome hubcap leaning against the wall. The set of her jaw was different now. No more letting them walk in and treat her space like a joke. She would pick the time, she would pick the place. And when they came back, she'd be ready. The next morning, the sun spilled through the dusty garage windows, streaking the concrete floor in gold. Riley moved slower than usual, not because she was tired, but because she was thinking, replaying every second of last night in her head. She could still hear Troy's laugh, that smug, hollow sound, like he'd already decided she wouldn't do anything about it. That alone was enough to make her grip her coffee mug so hard she nearly cracked it. She'd dealt with her share of mouthy customers before, but this was different. Troy, Mac, and Rico weren't just passing through. They hung around the neighborhood, always looking for somewhere to throw their weight around, and the fact they had chosen her garage as their playground made it personal. Her best friend, Lena, who ran the diner across the street, came over on her lunch break, apron dusted with flour. "I saw them leave last night," Lena said, leaning against the doorway. "You okay?" Riley forced a shrug. "I'm fine." "You're lying." Lena replied without hesitation. And you're chewing your cheek. You only do that when you're about to do something reckless. It's not reckless, Riley said, her voice low. It's overdue. She told Lena the bare bones of her plan. She wouldn't fight them in the street or call the cops, not yet. No, she'd set the terms herself. If they thought she was just a mechanic, she'd remind them exactly what kind of tools a mechanic could use. That afternoon, Riley went to the back of the shop and started rearranging things. She shifted the rolling tool chests closer to the center bay, cleared space between the lifts, and stacked a few boxes by the wall where she could duck behind them if needed. Every move was calculated, every change subtle enough that no regular customer would notice. She found her father's old 24-inch steel wrench heavier than anything she normally used. The thing was a beast you needed both hands to swing it. She'd cleaned it up years ago and kept it polished more as a keepsake than a working tool. Today, she oiled the joints, tested the grip, and leaned it against the workbench where it would be in easy reach. Her hands itched with restless energy. She spent hours checking the security cameras, adjusting the angles so every corner of the main bay was covered. If things went the way she expected, there would be she said. There'd be proof. By evening, Lena came back with a sandwich and sat watching her work. You're sure about this? They humiliated me in front of customers, Riley said, her voice steel. This is my shop. My family's name is on that sign. They think they can walk in and do that again. She shook her head. Not happening. Lena hesitated. You could call in backup. I don't need backup, Riley said flatly. I need them to know whose ground they're standing on. When she locked up that night, the garage looked normal, but only to the untrained eye. Riley had built herself a battleground disguised as an ordinary workspace. All she had to do was wait. And she didn't think she'd be waiting long. The thought of them walking through that door again didn't scare her anymore. It sparked something else entirely, the sharp, focused anticipation of a fight she knew she could win. They'd made her the underdog in front of everyone. Soon she'd flip that story on its head. 3 nights later, the trap was ready, and so was Riley. The air was thick with the smell of gasoline and motor oil, the low hum of the street outside filtering through the half-open bay door. She'd been working late on purpose, the kind of late that would make her an easy target for guys like Troy. Sure enough, the rumble of a poorly tuned engine rolled into earshot. Her pulse didn't spike. It slowed, each beat steady and deliberate. She didn't even look up when the battered black Chevy pulled into the lot. The driver's door swung open, and Troy climbed out first, flashing that same lazy grin, the kind that said he thought he already owned the room. Mac and Rico followed their boots, crunching on gravel, the sound sharp in the night air. Well, if it ain't Grease Girl, Troy said, leaning on the doorframe. Heard you missed us. Riley kept her eyes on the carburetor she was cleaning. Shop's closed. Come on, Mac said, stepping inside his shadow, stretching under the fluorescent lights. We just need a little tune-up. You're the best, right? It was almost too easy. Fine, she said, wiping her hands on a rag. Pull it into Bay 2. They pushed the truck forward, and she guided it into position. The moment the engine died, the room felt smaller, heavier. Troy sauntered toward her, hand in his pocket, smirk fixed in place. You work too hard, he said, circling her like a predator. Maybe we should help you relax. The words barely left his mouth before Rico closed the bay door with a heavy slam. The sound echoed, sealing them in. Perfect. Riley's voice stayed calm, almost casual. You boys picked the wrong night. Troy's smirk twitched. Oh yeah, why's that? She stepped back, her hand brushing the long steel wrench propped against the bench. Every muscle in her body was coiled ready. She'd positioned the rolling tool chest just right, one kick, and they'd block the path to the exit. The camera above was already recording. You came here thinking you'd push me around again, she said. But tonight, you're standing in my shop. My rules. Mac took a step closer. Or what? You gonna scold us into behaving? Her boot heel clicked against the concrete as she shifted her stance. No, she said softly. I'm gonna make sure you never try this with anyone again. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Troy glanced at the wrench, then back at her, his grin faltering for the first time. Rico laughed, but it was the nervous kind. Riley tilted her head toward the truck. Last chance to get in and leave. Instead, Troy reached for her arm. That was the moment she'd been waiting for. His hand barely brushed her sleeve before the wrench was in her grip, the steel's weight an extension of her arm. Riley pivoted on her heel, letting the momentum build, and swung with a speed that made the air whistle. The heavy head of the wrench stopped inches from Troy's temple, close enough for him to feel the cold metal and the force behind it. The smirk vanished. His eyes widened, and for the first time, he took a step back. You want to touch something in my shop? She said, her voice low and sharp. Start with a tool, not me. Mac moved in fast, maybe thinking she wouldn't turn the weapon on him. He thought wrong. She shifted her stance grip firm and swung low, catching him across the thigh with a sickening clang. He yelped, stumbling into the stack of boxes she'd set up as cover. Tools clattered to the floor like a warning bell. Rico froze his gaze, darting between her and the closed bay door. Hey, no need to get crazy. You think this is crazy? Riley's voice cut through him like a torque gun snap. Crazy is letting you walk in here and think I'm just gonna take it. Troy recovered, his footing jaw tightening. You think a wrench is gonna scare us? She took a slow step forward, wrench held low but steady. No, I think me holding it should. Mac was limping now, his bravado leaking out with every step he took backward. The way she kept her eyes locked on Troy made the whole garage feel smaller, tighter. He knew he couldn't make a move without her reacting. Troy tried to mask his hesitation with a sneer. You won't do it. Riley didn't blink. Try me. She took another step, closing the gap, and this time she let the wrench swing, not to maim, but to send a sharp clang into the side of the workbench right beside Troy's hip. The sound ricocheted off the metal walls, a brutal reminder of what that swing would feel like against bone. That broke him. Troy flinched hard, his bravado cracking wide open. All right, we're leaving. But she wasn't done. She pointed toward the camera above. Every second of this is recorded. Next time you try this stunt, it's not me you'll be facing. It's a courtroom. Mac muttered something under his breath, but Rico was already pulling the bay door open. Cold night air rushed in, carrying the scent of gasoline out into the street. Troy lingered for a beat, staring at her like he wanted to say something. Riley simply lifted the wrench again, her expression unreadable. That was enough. He turned and followed the others out their truck, coughing to life before rattling down the street. Riley stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle. The adrenaline still thrummed in her veins, but under it was something steadier satisfaction. She'd taken back her ground, and she knew deep down they'd think twice before stepping onto it again. The night after they fled the garage felt different. The air was the same mix of grease and gasoline, but there was a quiet in it, not the tense waiting kind, but a settled calm. Riley sat on the stool by her workbench, the old 24-inch wrench across her knees, like a trophy she hadn't asked for but had earned. Word got around fast. The next morning, 2 regular customers mentioned they'd heard something about Troy's crew limping out of her shop, looking like they'd seen a ghost. Riley didn't confirm or deny it. She didn't have to. The way she carried herself now was answer enough. Lena stopped by mid-morning carrying 2 coffees. So she said, setting one on the bench. I'm guessing they're not coming back. Riley smirked, sipping from the cup. If they do, they'll knock first. But the truth was, Riley knew she'd done more than just scare them off. She'd drawn a line when they couldn't cross without consequences. And that mattered more than the bruise on Mac's leg or the dent in Troy's pride. Still, she didn't dismantle the setup. The tool chests stayed where they were. The camera angles stayed tight on the bay, and the wrench stayed within reach. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparedness. She'd learned that when people saw you stand your ground, some would respect it, and some would test it again, just to see if you still had the steel to hold it. That evening, just before closing, a delivery driver dropped off a part she'd been waiting for. He hesitated before stepping inside. You're the mechanic who... He trailed off clearly, trying to phrase it without stepping on a landmine. She gave him a half smile. Yep, that's me. He nodded slowly, then chuckled. Guess I'll make sure to stay on your good side. It wasn't about fear. Not really. It was about changing the conversation. For too long, she'd been the girl mechanic, a novelty, a target for cheap jokes. Now, she was Riley Carter, the woman you didn't underestimate unless you wanted to limp home. When she finally locked up and stepped into the cool night, the street was quiet. She looked at the Carter's garage sign above the bay door. Her father's name, her work, her pride, and felt the coil of tension that had lived in her chest for months finally unwind. She didn't smile much, but she did then. Because she knew what they didn't the next time anyone tried to push her down, she wouldn't just stand her ground. She'd make sure they regretted stepping forward in the first place. And if Troy Mack or Rico ever forgot that lesson, she still had the wrench. And she still knew how to swing it. Strength isn't always about muscle or force. It's about refusing to let someone else define your worth. Riley's victory wasn't just in swinging the wrench. It was in reclaiming her ground, her dignity, and her voice. The lesson is clear. When people cross the line, you have the right and sometimes the responsibility to draw it back in bold, unshakable ink. Courage grows in the moments you decide you've had enough, and self-respect is worth defending every single time.